Do you know why doves are referred to as lovebirds? To answer that question, we should first look at different perspectives of Jesus and his ministry. It all ties together somehow. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 13, Jesus says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wing." There was going to be a video I was going to show for you, but it had too much outside noise, but that actually does happen. There was a dog looking at a hen, and the chicks kind of gathered around, and she kind of opened up her wings, and they came inside, and I thought it was pretty nifty. But you're not going to see that today. Oh, the mighty mother chicken. When bad weather approaches, or if she perceives danger, she will do a number of things. She will stand in front of her chicks, or she will gather them together and try to protect them as best she can. Of course, being a creature not able to fly very far or run very fast, the noble chicken has no real defensive or offensive capabilities, none to speak of. But still, her instinct is there, and she tries to protect her chicks. Now, this sort of reminds me of a time before seatbelts were required in passenger vehicles. There was such a time, and I remember my brother and I would fight to be in the front seat. Neither one of us wanted it because my mother was not known for paying a lot of attention to the road when she drove. She was easily distracted, and all too often she would end up having to stomp on the brakes to avoid some kind of an accident. But she had this habit. She would lash out her arm as she hit the brake. Sort of reminds me of the mother hen. Sad to say that throwing out that arm really didn't do anything to stop the force momentum of a body in sudden motion. But still, like the hen, she did what she could. More reflex, really. But we were no more safe than if she had actually done nothing. Unfortunately, whenever she did perform this safety measure, we still ended up sliding all over the front seat, possibly ending up on the floorboard or close to the window. And we got bruised ribs in the process. My mother did somehow believe that she was a safety conscious and very good driver. But my brother and I felt that sitting in the back seat was probably the best option for us. Multiple views of the same thing. I can tell you that I was very happy when the laws were passed that required safety belts installed in passenger vehicles. Now, as referring to different perspectives of the same thing, part of our message this morning is about how a sad and bitter King Herod perceived what Jesus was doing as a threat to him personally. Rome kept Herod in his position as more or less a puppet king. His main usefulness to Rome was keeping the often rebellious Israelites in order so they wouldn't detract from the oppression of the Roman government. And his style of leadership was a ruthless dictator. History often refers to Herod as the slayer of innocents. It was he who ordered the killing of every male child under the age of 2 when Jesus was born in an attempt to kill Jesus because he had heard that a baby king was born and he was threatened by that enough to slaughter babies. He trusted no one. Not even his own family. He killed one of his wives and 3 of his sons because he feared, for some reason, that they were plotting against him. And it would have been quite believable that Jesus could have been seen as being a threat to this lunatic king, but Jesus did not seem at all concerned by the news. His response to the warning from the Pharisees was to issue an insult back to King Herod. He replied, "Go tell that fox, I will drive out demons and heal people today and tomorrow, and on the 3rd day I will reach my goal. In any case, I must keep going today and tomorrow and the next. For surely no prophet can die outside of Jerusalem." This last bit here. Surely no prophet. Not only did Jesus brush away the threat of King Herod, but he also reminded with a bitter sting that the people inside the temple walls, the religious leaders of the Jewish people, had a history of not only rejecting the word from God, but they also had this nasty bit of a habit where they killed the messenger, God's prophets. Now, we mentioned in the beginning of the sermon that we are looking at doves, chickens, and perceptions concerning the ministry of Jesus and how we can tie those together. 2 bird references, some temple leaders, and 1 Messiah. I was going to say inner a bar, but I'm going to reference it. Basically, it's about perception. So, how can people perceive differently the same thing? We already see how Jesus wished that Jerusalem would allow him to gather them up and be their protector. And unlike the mother hen, he is not without defensive and offensive abilities. Jesus shows his great sadness because his offer of protection is rejected. And he's sad that he can't reach them. And then when Jesus tells the Pharisees, "Go tell that fox," fox weren't necessarily looked on favorably at the time. They worked at night in the shadows, and they were thought as predatory animals that you could do without. But he also saw the Pharisees as being messengers for the king, and they would go back and report the encounter with him, and Jesus was letting it be known that he was on a mission, and he would not be detoured from his mission. He was on a divine message from God. And he would not allow anyone or anything to stop him from its completion. And this gets us to the dove. If you know that doves are similar to pigeons, basically, with a few very unique qualities. And one of the qualities is something called single eye. They don't have side vision. Doves only see what's focused in front of them. And when you see 2 doves facing each other, they don't get distracted by what may be around them because they're only seeing ahead. And many people consider that a romantic notion, that lovebirds are so engrossed in each other that they can't be distracted. And people strive for that in themselves. It's very romantic, if somewhat not accurate. Love is there. I think they're looking to see if there's any food hanging around. But then there's this. It's a story of a man who comes upon a job site and he watches a guy laying bricks. He goes up to him and says, "What are you doing?" And the guy says, "Well, I'm laying bricks. Can't you see that?" And he walks over to another person who is a bricklayer and he says, "What are you doing?" And the workman with pride says, "I am building a cathedral." Both physically doing the same thing, but the first laborer just was occupied with what the moment was, what he was doing at that time, while the second one looked at the bigger picture. His perception was the final project of a cathedral for God. Jesus is somewhat similar in his reaction to the mission upon which he is engaged. Everything Jesus does, he does for the Father who sent him. Christ is working for the ultimate goal of bringing salvation to the world. And he has very little time for earthly, petty distractions. More focus than the lovebirds, more intent than a mother hen gathering her chicks. Nothing is going to take him off the course which he has set himself upon. He is doing the Lord's work for the good of all creation. But from the perspective of a paranoid and evil human king, Jesus was at least a bother who needed to be contained. And at the time, such a paranoid ruler, such as Herod, had all the authority he would ever need to have Jesus, or actually anyone, killed with just a word. And this may have actually happened. Perhaps Herod did express a desire to end Jesus. And if so, it would probably help us understand when we read, some Pharisees came to Jesus and said to him, leave this place and go somewhere else. Herod wants to kill you. But I have to ask myself, why did temple leaders who were not known for being friendly to Jesus warn him of impending doom? All throughout the Gospels, the Pharisees are usually presented in a negative light. Jesus himself often calls them such things as brood of vipers, fools, hypocrites. And they were actually actively plotting the death of Jesus themselves. So why would Pharisees have wanted to protect Jesus in this instance? Jesus had publicly stated that his goal was to reach Jerusalem, and he was going to get them relatively soon. Could it be that the Pharisees used Herod's threats as a pretext to try to get rid of Jesus without killing him? Were they trying to frighten him, scare him enough so that he would go somewhere else other than to Jerusalem, and therefore forego his mission from God? That would be one possibility. Here's another. We do know about certain Pharisees, one in particular, Joseph of Arimathea. He was friendly to Jesus. And perhaps there were even others. And it might have been them who came to Jesus. All we know is some Pharisees came to Jesus. But mostly it would seem Herod was doing them a favor, if this was true. And Herod would represent the Romans killing Jesus and relieve the temple leaders of having to deal with them removing Jesus from the scene. Or again, it could have been that they were actually looking to protect Jesus because they were friendly to him. Either way, it doesn't really matter. Jesus would not be frightened, persuaded, or tricked off his course, his mission. And he would not deviate at all from his mission. His course was salvation of the world, of the whole world. He came in the name of the Lord. Jesus was blessed because he came in the name of the Lord. This is a phrase 40 times or more it's used throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. And people who that phrase is used to describe had done incredible, glorious, wonderful things for God. The young boy David came in the name of the Lord, and he slew the lion. The apostles carried on after Jesus. Their work in the name of the Lord allowed them to boldly profess the resurrected Jesus and the salvation that he offers. Christ Jesus came from God the Father, and he had completed the work he was sent to do. Jesus did these great and good works in the name of the Lord, and he is blessed by God. Likewise, when we come and do our good works for the Lord, we too are greatly blessed by the eternal God of mercy. There is something here that we share with Jesus. When we do the work of God, we are blessed by God immeasurably greatly. However, there's also major differences in this between us and Jesus. Jesus knew, and Jesus understood, and Jesus was in no way intimidated off his course. He knew he was working for God. Do we share that same thing? Can we be dissuaded, threatened, frightened, tricked off of working for the Lord with our hearts? Can we make this same claim of a resolve that Jesus had? Notice, the fox works at night in the shadows, but Jesus is open and direct in the light of day. He hides nothing. How many secrets do you have that you don't want the world to know? Therefore, the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous. You are protected by God. Yeah, you might be dealt with harshly in this world. You could be imprisoned, sued, in his time, killed for working for God. But that's not what this is talking about. The protection is the life after. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. All that man can accomplish without God will eventually fade away, crumble to dust. But while the works of God will surely endure forever, when you come in the name of the Lord, you represent God of eternity. There's nothing going to get in your way. I'm sure the apostles did not think that 2,000 plus years later would still be talking about their works, would still be praising their name, would still come to Christ because of what they did. I don't know if they saw a lot of instant gratification for their work, but the results we harvest today. I would challenge you, consider working for God. And when you go in the name of the Lord. You will be greatly blessed when you come in the name of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord.